The sun was a burning orange disk sinking low behind the ragged hills, turning the endless plains into rivers of gold and shadow. Wind carried dust across the dry land, whispering through brittle grass and clattering the loose boards of Samuel Carter's barn. He leaned against a weathered fence post, wiping sweat from his brow with a frayed sleeve. Another long day of toil was ending, and yet his ranch, his only remaining piece of the world, still looked as empty as his heart felt. The drought had taken most of his cattle. Loneliness had taken the rest. The land was silent except for the creaking of old wood and the occasional cry of a distant hawk. For years now, Samuel had lived alone in this corner of the plains. Once his wife Mary used to hum as she cooked by the window, her laughter drifting out with the scent of stew. But she was gone, buried under the small oak tree behind the house. The ranch had become more of a memory than a home, a place where ghosts lingered in every creak of the porch and every shadow that passed his window. He spoke to no one, saw no one, and the only company he had left were the horses that still grazed on what little grass the land could offer. That evening, Samuel was fixing a broken section of the fence near the creek bed, though creek was generous, since the water had long since turned into a thin, muddy trickle. He hammered in a loose nail, listening to the distant groan of the wind rolling down the valley. Then, out of the corner of his eye, something moved. At first he thought it was a tumbleweed caught in the fence, swaying in the dying light. But then he saw it again, a shape, crawling low to the ground, inching forward like it carried the weight of the whole world on its back. Samuel froze, squinting into the distance. The light was fading fast, turning the landscape into shades of copper and shadow. He took a few slow steps forward. The figure was human, that much was clear now, but barely. Crawling through the dust was a young man, his bare back streaked with blood, his clothes torn to rags. One arm dragged uselessly, and his face, though smeared with dirt, carried the proud features of a native tribesman. The man's lips were cracked, his eyes wild with exhaustion and thirst. Samuel's instinct kicked in before thought could. He ran. "Hey, hold on!" he shouted, but the man didn't respond. When Samuel reached him, he dropped to his knees, turning the stranger gently onto his side. The young man's chest rose and fell in ragged, shallow breaths. His eyes fluttered open for just a moment. Dark, intense eyes that flickered with both fear and pain, then rolled back as he collapsed completely. "Lord Almighty," Samuel muttered under his breath. He looked around. No one else in sight. Just the vast emptiness of the plain stretching in every direction. Whoever this man was, he wasn't going to survive another hour under the heat without help. Samuel slid his arms under the young man's shoulders and heaved him up, grunting with the effort. "Easy, son. I got you," he murmured. The man's head lolled against his shoulder, his skin hot to the touch. The walk back to the house felt longer than it ever had. The old boards creaked as Samuel pushed open the front door with his shoulder, carrying the man inside and laying him gently on the narrow cot near the hearth. He grabbed a bucket of water from the corner, the last of what he had fetched from the well that morning, and dipped a cloth into it. Carefully, he pressed the damp rag against the man's forehead, then to his lips. The stranger's mouth moved slightly, instinctively trying to drink. "Slow down," Samuel said softly. "You'll choke yourself." He poured a little water into a tin cup and lifted the man's head. "Here, easy now." The young man took a few sips, coughing weakly. His body trembled, but his breathing steadied little by little. Samuel tore one of his old shirts into strips, cleaning the blood from the stranger's shoulder and wrapping the wounds as best as he could. It wasn't the first time he'd seen an injury like that. Deep cuts along the ribs, bruises across the back, and what looked like a bullet graze on the upper arm. Whatever had happened, it wasn't a small skirmish. When Samuel finished tending to him, he sat down on the edge of the bed, staring at the man's face. There was something noble about his features, even in unconsciousness. The strong jawline, the steady rise and fall of his chest, the faint tattoo marks on his shoulder that told of his tribe. Samuel didn't know which tribe, though he'd met a few natives in his younger days, men who hunted nearby and traded skins and herbs for tools. He had always treated them with respect, though not everyone in town shared that courtesy. The night grew darker, and the only sound inside the house was the faint crackle of the oil lamp. Samuel leaned back in his chair, feeling the ache in his bones. He thought of how strange life could be, how a man could spend years in solitude, convinced he had seen all there was to see, and then fate would send a half-dead stranger crawling to his doorstep. He chuckled quietly. "Guess the Lord's got his own way of keeping a man company," he muttered. Around midnight, the stranger stirred again. He muttered something in a language Samuel didn't understand, soft, rhythmic syllables like a prayer or a plea. Samuel leaned closer. "You're safe, son," he said gently. "Ain't nobody gonna hurt you here." The young man's hand twitched, reaching toward him, then fell limp again. Samuel placed his rough, calloused hand over the man's and sat there in silence, keeping watch as the moonlight filtered through the thin curtains. Hours passed. Samuel dozed in and out of sleep, his head resting against the chair. Every now and then he would wake to check the bandages, pour a little more water down the man's throat, and whisper words of comfort to no one in particular. It had been a long time since he'd spoken to another soul, and now his voice felt foreign in the quiet air, but it felt right, almost like he was speaking to the son he never had. Sometime near dawn, Samuel stepped outside for a breath of cool air. The night was calm, filled with the smell of dry earth and the faint chirping of crickets. The stars stretched endlessly above him, brighter than he remembered. He leaned against the porch post and looked out across the fields, his wife's old rocking chair creaking softly beside him. "You'd tell me I'm crazy, Mary," he whispered with a half-smile, "bringing a wounded stranger into the house like that. But you'd have done the same thing, wouldn't you?" He could almost hear her laughter again, sweet and clear as the summer rain. When he returned inside, the stranger's breathing had grown stronger. Samuel knelt beside him and placed a hand on his forehead, cooler now, no longer burning. The relief that washed through him was strange, almost overwhelming. He hadn't realized until now how deeply he wanted this man to live, maybe because saving him felt like saving a part of himself, the part that still believed in compassion, in doing good without expecting anything back. The first streaks of dawn crept through the window, painting the room in pale gold. Samuel poured another cup of water and took a seat beside the cot again. The man's eyes flickered open this time, dark and alert. For a moment, confusion flashed across his face, then fear. He tried to sit up, but Samuel placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "Easy there," Samuel said, his voice low and steady. "You're hurt bad. You need rest." The man stared at him, breathing hard. His voice was hoarse when he spoke, the words slow and cautious. "Who are you?" "Name's Samuel Carter," the old man replied. "I live here. Found you crawling by my fence last night." The stranger blinked, his gaze darting toward the window as if expecting danger outside. "They were chasing me," he whispered, his accent soft but clear. "Raiders. Took our horses. Killed my brothers." His voice cracked. Samuel nodded slowly, not pressing for details. "Well, you're safe here now," he said. "Ain't nobody gonna find you out here unless they're lost themselves." The young man's eyes softened. "You gave me water," he said, almost like he couldn't believe it. Samuel smiled faintly. "Wouldn't be much of a man if I didn't." For a long moment, they just looked at each other. Two souls from different worlds, both scarred in their own ways, sharing a silence that spoke more than words ever could. Outside, the morning wind began to rise, carrying with it the scent of dust and sage. Inside, an old rancher and a wounded stranger sat together in the quiet dawn. And though neither knew it yet, the small act of mercy shared that night would ripple farther than either of them could imagine. Samuel stood up and poured a bit more water into the tin cup, setting it beside the cot. "Rest, son," he said gently. "You're safe here." The young man nodded faintly, exhaustion pulling him back under. Samuel watched him for a long time, then turned toward the window, the first rays of light warming his face. Something stirred deep inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. He didn't know it yet. But this wounded stranger had just walked into his life for a reason, one that would soon bring the sound of drums, horses, and 1,000 voices to his lonely ranch. But for now, in that quiet golden morning, it was just one man saving another, and that was enough. The morning sun crept over the distant hills, spilling soft light across the dusty plains. Inside the small ranch house, the air was cool and still, carrying the faint smell of smoke from the dying embers in the fireplace. Samuel Carter sat slouched in his wooden chair beside the cot, his hat tilted low over his eyes. He hadn't truly slept, only drifted in and out of half-conscious rest, his mind hovering between dreams and worry. Every few minutes, his gaze would flick to the young nay. He poured a bit of water into the cup and handed it over. Tahoma took it carefully, his hands trembling slightly as he drank. When he finished, he let out a soft sigh, closing his eyes as though the simple act of drinking clean water brought life back into him. Samuel sat back down, resting his elbows on his knees. "You're lucky I was outside when you came crawling down that ridge," he said with a faint chuckle. "Another hour in that heat and you'd have been buzzard food." Tahoma gave a weak smile. "You didn't have to help me." "No," Samuel agreed. "But a man's got to do what's right even when no one's watching." He looked at the younger man for a long moment. "You hungry?" Tahoma hesitated. "A little." Samuel stood and moved to the stove. It had been a while since he cooked for anyone else, but he still had a few things left in his pantry. He sliced some bread, warmed up a pot of stew, and placed the meal on a small tray beside the cot. Tahoma watched him, cautious but grateful. As the smell of the food filled the small cabin, a quiet peace settled between them. Samuel poured himself some coffee and sat across from his guest, his weathered hands wrapped around the mug. "Been out here long?" Tahoma asked after a while, his voice soft but curious. "Long enough," Samuel replied. "Bought this land near 20 years ago. Thought it'd be the start of something. Back then it was me and my wife. She wanted a garden, I wanted cattle. Guess neither of us got quite what we hoped for." He gave a short laugh, though it was tinged with sadness. "She is gone?" Tahoma asked carefully. Samuel nodded slowly. "A few winters back. Fever took her quick. Buried her under that oak tree outside." He gestured toward the window where the tree stood alone, its leaves trembling in the wind. "Ain't much left here but the land and what memories it keeps." Tahoma lowered his eyes. "My people say the spirits never leave those who remember them." Samuel looked at him, surprised by the quiet wisdom in the young man's tone. "That's a fine way to see it," he said after a moment. "Maybe that's true." For a while they sat in silence, eating and listening to the soft creak of the house. Outside, the day brightened, the sun climbing higher. After finishing the meal, Samuel went out to fetch some fresh water from the well. When he returned, Tahoma was sitting up, carefully inspecting his bandages. "You did this?" he asked. "Best I could with what I had," Samuel said, setting the bucket down. "Been a while since I patched anyone up." Tahoma looked at the clean wrappings and then at Samuel. "You've done well. My people would say you've got a healer's hands." Samuel chuckled. "These hands? They've only ever known hammers and fences." "Still," Tahoma said, his eyes soft. "You saved me." Samuel shrugged. Though deep down, something warm flickered in his chest, a feeling he hadn't felt in a long time. He wasn't used to being thanked. As the day went on, Samuel helped Tahoma sit outside for some air. They sat on the porch together, watching the land stretch into the horizon. The horses grazed quietly, the air filled with the hum of grasshoppers and the rustle of the dry wind. "You ever think about leaving this place?" Tahoma asked suddenly. Samuel tilted his head. "Leaving? I've thought about it plenty. But where would I go? The world's moving faster than I can keep up. Out there's noise and crowds and folks who don't know how to look a man in the eye anymore. Here," he gestured at the open land. "I can breathe. Even if it's lonely, it's mine." Tahoma nodded thoughtfully. "My people understand that. The land is not just dirt to us, it is memory, spirit. When we walk it, we walk with those before us." Samuel turned to him, intrigued. "You talk like a man twice your age." Tahoma smiled faintly. "My grandfather taught me many things. He said, 'A man's worth isn't in what he owns, but in what he gives.'" Samuel stared out at the plains. "Sounds like he was a wise man." "He was," Tahoma said softly, his gaze distant. "And he would have thanked you for what you've done." "Don't thank me yet," Samuel said, half smiling. "You still got a long way to heal." As the afternoon stretched on, Tahoma began to regain some strength. He helped Samuel with small chores around the ranch, holding boards steady while Samuel nailed them, fetching tools from the shed, or simply sitting nearby and talking. The two men fell into an easy rhythm, their words slow and thoughtful, as if neither had spoken so openly in years. Samuel learned that Tahoma's tribe lived 2 days' ride north near the river, where the forest met the plains. They hunted, traded, and moved with the seasons. Tahoma had been a scout, one of those who rode ahead to look for danger or opportunity. He had seen the changes coming, he said. More settlers, more fences, less freedom. "Our hunting grounds shrink every year," he said quietly. My people do not want war, but sometimes war finds us anyway. Samuel listened carefully. Ain't much different for us farmers, he said after a while. We fight the land, the weather, sometimes even our neighbors. Seems nobody's got it easy anymore. That made Tahoma smile faintly. Maybe hardship is what makes a man remember what matters. Maybe so, Samuel agreed. As evening approached, the two men watched the sunset together from the porch, the sky burning orange and purple, the wind cooling. Samuel handed Tahoma a mug of tea, the steam curling between them. You've got strength in you, Samuel said quietly. More than you realize. Tahoma looked down. I feel shame for running, he admitted. When the raiders came, I wanted to fight. But when I saw my brothers fall, I couldn't. Samuel's expression softened. Listen here. You did what you had to do to live. Sometimes surviving takes more courage than fighting. Tahoma met his eyes, and in that moment something passed between them. A silent understanding, an unspoken bond. When the first stars appeared, Tahoma stood slowly, testing his balance. You've done much for me, he said. But I can't stay. My people will be looking for me. They need to know I'm alive. Samuel felt a pang in his chest, sharper than he expected. You sure you're strong enough to travel? Tahoma nodded. I must go. The spirits of my brothers won't rest until I return. Samuel went inside and returned with a jug of water, a loaf of bread wrapped in cloth, and a small knife. Take these, he said, handing them over. It ain't much, but it'll help you on your way. Tahoma accepted the gifts with quiet respect. You've shown me kindness when you had nothing to gain, he said. I will not forget. Samuel gave a small smile. You take care of yourself out there, son, and if you ever find yourself near this valley again, you'll always have a place here. Tahoma looked at him, his eyes glinting in the fading light. You have my word, he said. Then, after a brief pause, he added softly, My people repay what is given in good faith. Samuel watched as Tahoma walked toward the hills, the jug slung over his shoulder. The sun dipped behind him, casting his figure in long shadows. Just before disappearing beyond the ridge, Tahoma turned and raised a hand in farewell. Samuel lifted his hat in return. The land was quiet again, but it didn't feel empty anymore. Samuel stood there for a long while, the evening wind tugging at his coat. He felt something stir deep inside, a flicker of warmth, of purpose. That night, he sat by the window, staring out at the moonlit plains. Somewhere out there, the young man he had saved was finding his way home. Samuel smiled faintly to himself. Safe travels, Tahoma, he whispered. You've got a strong spirit. Don't let the world break it. He didn't know it yet, but that single act of mercy, a cup of water, a bandaged wound, a moment of compassion, would echo louder than he could ever imagine. Because sometimes the smallest kindness, offered without expectation, can ripple through the world and come back like thunder on the horizon. The next morning broke quiet and golden, the kind of morning where even the wind seemed to hesitate before stirring the grass. Samuel Carter rose before dawn, as he always did. The habits of solitude had never left him. Coffee first, then checking the fences, then feeding the horses before the heat rolled in. But today felt strangely hollow. He caught himself looking toward the ridge, half expecting to see that young man again, though he knew Tahoma was long gone by now. The air was still cool, the light soft and hazy, when Samuel set to work mending the east fence. The old boards groaned beneath his hammer, the sound echoing across the open land. In the distance, the oak tree where Mary lay was swaying gently, its leaves whispering in the breeze. Samuel stopped to wipe his brow, his gaze drifting across the endless plain. The land was quiet. Too quiet, he thought. Even the birds had fallen silent. He was just about to grab another board when the ground beneath his boots seemed to hum. A faint tremor, at first so small he thought it was in his imagination. Then it came again, stronger this time. The nails in his hand rattled. His horse in the corral snorted nervously, ears twitching. Samuel straightened up, his heart beating faster. The sound grew, a low, steady rumble rolling from beyond the horizon. It wasn't thunder. It was heavier, rhythmic, a sound that carried purpose. Hooves, many of them. He turned toward the ridge where the sun was climbing and saw a cloud of dust rising in the distance, a vast, billowing wave that glowed orange in the light. He shaded his eyes with a trembling hand. For a moment he thought maybe it was a cattle drive gone off course, but then he saw the colors. Flashes of red, yellow, white, and black painted across horses and riders. His stomach dropped. Lord Almighty, he breathed. They were coming fast. Dozens at first, then more, until the land seemed to move beneath their feet. The sound of drums echoed faintly through the wind. The air filled with it. Thunder made of hooves and heartbeat. Samuel took a step back, his mind racing. He'd heard stories of tribes moving together, but never had he seen so many at once. As they drew closer, he could make out the details. Proud warriors with feathers woven into their hair, their faces painted with sacred symbols. Some carried spears, others bows or rifles slung across their backs. They rode in formation, disciplined and silent, the kind of silence that made your soul tremble. Samuel's throat went dry. He looked around. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. He was just one old man standing on a stretch of dry land with nothing but a hammer in his hand. The dust rolled toward him like a storm. By the time they reached his fence line, the riders fanned out, surrounding his ranch in a wide circle. Their horses pawed the ground, snorting, their nostrils flaring. Not a single man spoke. Samuel could feel their eyes on him, dozens of them, sharp, assessing, unreadable. He swallowed hard and raised a hand, not in defense but greeting. I mean no harm, he called out, his voice steady though his heart was pounding. From among the crowd, one rider moved forward. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his long dark hair tied back with a strip of leather. The sunlight gleamed off the ornaments on his chest, bones and beads woven into intricate designs. His expression was unreadable, his posture regal. He rode closer, until his horse was just a few feet from Samuel. Then the man dismounted with a graceful motion and stood before him. The air between them was heavy, the silence alive with unspoken meaning. Another rider emerged from behind, this one younger, riding a painted horse with red handprints across its flank. When Samuel saw his face, his breath caught in his throat. It was Tahoma. Samuel froze, disbelief washing over him like a wave. Tahoma, he murmured. The young warrior smiled faintly, his eyes filled with recognition and warmth. You remember, he said, stepping closer. I told you my people repay kindness. Samuel looked around, realizing what he was seeing, the sheer number of them. There weren't just one or two tribes here, there were many. The patterns on their clothes, the symbols painted on their horses, all different, each representing a distinct people. Tahoma, Samuel said slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. Who are all these folks? Tahoma turned, his gaze sweeping across the riders. 7 tribes, he said proudly. The Eagle River, the Bear Creek, the Red Cloud, the Fire Mesa, the Iron Horse, the Wind Hollow, and the Silver Fox. They have all come together. Samuel's mouth went dry. All of them? Here? Tahoma nodded. They came for you. The old man blinked, stunned. For me? Yes, Tahoma said, his tone solemn now. Because you gave water to a dying man when you could have turned him away. You treated a stranger as your own. That is not a small thing among my people. Before Samuel could speak, the tall warrior, clearly a chief, stepped forward. His voice carried a deep, calm power as he said, This man's name is known to all who ride here today. Samuel Carter, a man of the dry lands who gave life when others would have given death. The crowd of warriors began to murmur, a low sound like wind through trees. Samuel stood frozen, his hands trembling slightly. I didn't do nothing special, he said softly, almost embarrassed. I just helped a man who needed it. The chief stepped closer, his eyes studying Samuel's face. To you, perhaps. But to us, that act is sacred. When a man gives water to one of our own, he gives it to the spirits of our ancestors as well. Samuel didn't know what to say. His throat tightened, his eyes beginning to sting. All around him, men and women dismounted their horses, forming a wide circle around the ranch yard. Some carried drums, others held feathers, blankets, or carved wooden symbols. Children peeked from behind their mothers' skirts, curious and shy. The air buzzed with quiet reverence. Tahoma turned to Samuel, smiling. "They wish to honor you," he said simply. "Honor me?" Samuel repeated, shaking his head. "I don't deserve any honor. I just did what anyone with a heart would do." The chief nodded slowly. "That is exactly why you are worthy." Then the drums began, a low, rhythmic beat that seemed to come from the earth itself. The warriors began to chant, deep, resonant tones that echoed across the valley. Women joined in, their voices rising and falling like wind through pine trees. The sound filled the air, rolling over the plains until even the horses bowed their heads. Samuel stood there in awe. He had seen church gatherings in his life, even funerals that moved him to tears, but this was something else. It wasn't just sound. It was spirit. It was gratitude in its purest form. Tahoma stepped forward, holding something in his hand. A staff carved from dark wood, decorated with eagle feathers and beads that shimmered in the sunlight. "This," he said, "is the staff of peace. It is passed only to those who have earned the trust of many tribes. My people have agreed. From this day forward, your land will be watched over and protected." Samuel stared at it, his hands trembling as Tahoma placed it in his grasp. "I can't take this," he whispered. "I don't even understand what it means." "It means," Tahoma said softly, "that you are no longer alone." For the first time in many years, Samuel felt tears spill freely down his cheeks. He looked around at the hundreds of faces surrounding him, faces filled with pride, warmth, and respect. He had lived years thinking his life had become a whisper lost in the wind, yet here he stood, a single act of kindness turning into a moment that would outlive him. The chief raised his arms to the sky and said something in his language, a blessing, Samuel guessed. The crowd echoed his words, and the sound rolled through the valley like thunder. Then, one by one, the warriors stepped forward to touch Samuel's shoulder, their gestures solemn and kind. Some left small gifts, a feather, a stone, a bracelet woven from grass. Tokens of thanks, each carrying meaning. As the sun dipped lower, the drums turned from solemn to joyful. Children ran through the dust, laughter ringing out. Fires were lit, food was shared. The 7 tribes feasted together on Samuel's land, telling stories, singing songs, and filling the lonely ranch with life. Samuel sat near the fire beside Tahoma, the staff of peace resting across his lap. "I never thought I'd see a day like this," he said quietly. Tahoma smiled. "You showed compassion when the world is forgetting what that means. My people do not forget such things. You have become part of our story now." Samuel stared into the fire, watching the flames dance. "Part of your story," he repeated softly, almost to himself. The words sank deep, warming a place inside him that had been cold for too long. Later, as the night grew deeper and the stars blazed above, Samuel wandered away from the firelight. He stood at the edge of his field, looking out at the countless campfires flickering across the plains. The sound of drums still throbbed gently in the distance, echoing like a heartbeat. He thought of Mary then, how she used to say that kindness always came back around. "You get what you give, Sam," she used to tell him. "Maybe not right away, but someday." He smiled to himself, the wind brushing his face. "You were right, Mary," he whispered. "You were right." Behind him, the laughter of children mingled with the rhythm of drums. The ranch, once a lonely patch of dust and silence, was alive with song and light. And Samuel Carter, the poor rancher who once thought his days had long since passed him by, stood beneath the wide western stars knowing he had become part of something far greater than himself. That night, as the tribes sang their final song, a prayer of gratitude carried on the wind, Samuel lifted the staff of peace high into the air. The crowd cheered, and in that moment the plains themselves seemed to breathe again. He had given one man water. In return, 7 nations had given him a place in their hearts. And as the firelight glowed across the valley, Samuel Carter finally understood. Kindness never ends where you leave it. It travels, through people, through time, through the beating hearts of those who remember.